Okay. Gender is such a hot topic in culture today. I feel compelled to make a video about it because the level of misunderstanding out there about it is driving me crazy. I know that the title might sound arrogant, but I fucking mean it. People's brains are so scrambled about this. So in this video, I'm gonna try to discuss another way to think about it so that it still fulfills its original purpose without trailing off into all the sensationalizations. Apparently, it was the now deceased sexologist and researcher John Money who originally popularized the term gender. Soon after, feminists embraced the term to describe the social construction of masculinity and femininity as opposed to the biological term sex. I think at this point everyone knows this or thinks that they understand this. Sex is biology, reproductive anatomy, and gender is the social stuff, the social role that's attached to your sex. So for example, you could say that clothing is gendered. It doesn't have anything to do with someone's sex per se. There's nothing about a man's penis that precludes him from wearing a dress or high heels, but the social role of man does sort of, in a way, preclude a man from wearing a dress or high heels. Some forms of labor can also be gendered, like mining or childcare. You know, there's a great example. Pregnancy is to do with sex, while childcare would be more gendered. Here are some explanations of gender from major websites when I Googled the term. CIHR, gender refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identities of blah, 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 these people. And then over here from Medical News Today, gender refers to the role of a male or female in society known as a gender role, or an individual's concept of themselves, or gender identity. So everyone's in agreement that sex is biological while gender is social. Or if you're an asshole, you might say sex is between your legs while gender is between your ears. And in my experience, the less you know about this topic, the more likely you are to say something like that, or something like, actually, you're confusing sex with gender, when it's like, no, I'm not. You are. Now, the people who get it the most wrong, which is like everyone pretty much, generally fall into one of two camps. There's the people who are more skeptical of gender being a social construction, who tend to be more socially conservative. They might agree that gender encompasses all the social stuff, but they'll still talk about gender as though it's fixed to sex. They'll point out that it is highly correlated with sex in the sense that women are usually more feminine and men are usually more masculine. But what they mean by feminine and masculine is not always clear. Like, sure, men are universally more aggressive, I'll give you that. That is, I think, ultimately tied to biology in a way, like just in terms of strength and testosterone. But if you're saying that women are more likely to like feminine colors, like pink, well, that's totally socially constructed. There's no biological reason for women or girls to prefer pink, and there's plenty of evidence to show that. Then you have the more supposedly progressive camp, who agrees that gender is social, but they believe it to be more fluid. The funny thing is that labeling gender as fluid still presupposes that it's some discrete or concrete thing. They're just saying that it can be switched on and off, or that you can change from one to another at will. You know, from one to another, from one concrete one to another concrete one. Some will take this even further and say that gender is inborn, that your sense of what your role should be, what your gender role should be, is like inside you. This is a real head scratcher for me because it's literally just what old school anti-feminists used to think, but in reverse. So instead of saying that women are feminine, they're saying that feminine people are always women. This is how confused the issue is getting. And to be clear, I totally reject both ways of thinking. Here's how I would put it. Gender is social, yes, but we have to stop talking about it like it's a concrete, independently existing thing. That means it cannot really be inborn, nor does it make sense for it to function primarily as an identity in the sense that it could ever be chosen from the ether and applied to oneself based solely on one's feelings. Gender is more of an abstract system of behaviors and choices. By nature of being a social phenomenon, it doesn't really make sense to treat it as something concrete that you could ever choose or straightforwardly represent or exhibit. Totally. Because it can only emerge through practices that are heavily dependent on context and the environment. This means that it can't really function as an identity because it's more something that you do. But also acting like a few behaviors can place you as an individual squarely in one gender over another, is nonsense. Like, I rarely wear makeup, I don't remove my body hair, so does that mean that my gender is man? No, that's stupid. Now, increasingly, whenever I'm undergoing some bureaucratic process, I'll be filling out some forms and they'll ask me for my sex and they'll ask me for my gender, and I really don't know how to answer that question. I put woman because, you know, I'm female and I'm not trans, and I believe that's basically what they're trying to get at. But I'm curious about what other people are thinking when they check that box. It's, you know, if they check the woman box, if they're the type of person who truly believes that gender is a concrete social role or an identity, you know, what do they really mean by that? Are they saying that they look like a woman superficially, in which case womanhood is about physiology and biology? Are they saying that they act like a woman, in which case they're kind of saying like their gender role is woman, which would, there's no way for that not to be sexist bullshit. People keep going back and forth also on how real gender is, and I would say it's real in the sense that it exists as much as any other social phenomenon, like nation states or laws. But I kind of agree to an extent with social conservatives who say you can't really choose your gender, but for different reasons. It's not something that you can really point to or will into being. You know, you can choose which gendered behaviors to exhibit for sure, and everyone should be able to do that. But the idea that it reflects like who you truly are inside, or that it can like place you into one social category over another, is just really neoliberal, hyper-individualized thinking. Someone recently gave me a really good example of a way to explain this distinction that I'm going to share. And it was regarding cultural practices in sub-Saharan Africa, revolving around women and water. So in countries without running water, where water must be collected, the responsibility to do so typically falls on women. So women will travel great distances with a heavy container, and they'll transport the water back to home. So there's been all sorts of research into how this leads to health problems like spinal issues, back problems, etc. Because this is a responsibility that falls primarily on women, but it's not inherent to their sex, you could say that this is a gendered problem. You know, it's got nothing to do with female anatomy that women walk these long distances with heavy containers on their heads and then they develop all these spinal problems. It's to do with their role in society. But note that they don't straightforwardly choose this gender or merely identify with it. It's a practice that emerges based on cultural and material circumstances. This doesn't mean that if someone carries water, this makes them a woman, or if a woman doesn't carry water, then that makes her not a woman. And I doubt if anyone had some sort of compulsion to carry heavy buckets of water over great distances, that makes them truly a woman inside. You might also be aware of cultures with third and additional genders. Progressives love to talk about these cultures because they think that this proves their theory that gender is fluid. But a lot of the times these additional genders are created in these cultures because gender roles for women and men are so rigid there that in order for, say, men to have a role outside of the traditional man's role, they need to put him into a new category in order to be able to make sense of them. So even there, gender isn't really fluid there, since it depends so heavily on their societal role and their ability to perform it. It's certainly not a matter of just identity, you know? As this has been frustrating me, I've been thinking more and more about it. I think part of this emerges from this pattern that's uniquely American. It's this very specific way of concretizing abstract things and categorizing things in ways that make no sense. I don't know if this is because we're also individualistic. This makes us crave order. Maybe the collapse of community has led us to construct in-groups based on these abstract principles. Maybe it's because our culture is youth obsessed and this incentivizes people to remain in this adolescent mindset that's just way over concerned with identity. I find that these mistakes made about gender are directly parallel to the Western propensity to overdiagnose and overpathologize. You know, they say Americans pathologize the normal and normalize the pathological, or something like that. Many will have realized that there's a new psychiatric disorder constructed by experts seemingly every year or so. And all of these are constantly shifting in the DSM, which is entirely a political document. Anyway, these disorders are just labels we put on a collection of behaviors that we have collectively determined as a society are deviant. They usually have no inherent independent existence. So for example, if someone is on the autism spectrum or has ADHD or anxiety disorder, there's no objective way of diagnosing them. The labels are just a way of describing the set of symptoms, all of which emerge depending on the environment and societal conditions. So, just like gender, people treat psychological disorders as an inherently existent thing that's independent of societal arrangements, which is just totally wrong. That doesn't mean that they aren't real in the social sense, but it is important to recognize that they aren't objectively real, they aren't concrete things, and they probably don't function best as identities. And they really aren't fluid, and they depend heavily on your relationship to society. Anyway, I'm really disappointed in the direction the gender discussion has gone, but I have hope. I am a fool. Thanks for listening.